Alright, time for me to make some enemies, I guess. You know someone is going to get mad when it comes to a Sonic the Hedgehog video, and the Sonic Prime one to boot. But why make this video if I know I'm walking on mines? Because I legit love Sonic and I feel like I have stuff to say. Would people agree with said stuff? I don't know. I think it's impossible to agree on anything when it comes to the Blue Hedgehog. But no harm in trying, right? So, Sonic Prime came and went, and was it polarizing amongst fans? Some love it, some hate it, some are in the middle, blah blah blah, you get the idea. However, while I make fun of the notion that it's impossible to have a discussion about any Sonic media without two of the sides wanting to spin dash at each other, I've come to the conclusion that this show kinda wants to be controversial. Yes, you heard me right. Sonic Prime wants to be controversial. I have to state before anything else though, saying that I think this show is meant to be controversial is not an attack on the crew behind it, and nor do I believe they did anything in order to piss Sonic fans off intentionally. You can tell the people behind the show, from writers to animators to voice actors, all had a great time behind the scenes, and I do not intend to imply anything on their behalf, nor do I want them to be ridiculed for anything I say in this video. Hell, words can describe how bad I feel for Ian Flynn for having to take some of the fire for decisions he had no control over. In fact, I'll even say that despite my claim and criticism I'll point out later, I really like Sonic Prime. The animation is beautiful, action scenes are great, it's funny, sometimes intense, the writing can really shine sometimes, Shadow's the best he's been in years, I love Nine's arc, I do legitimately like the show. But I can also be critical of stuff I like, and I think that as much as I enjoyed Sonic Prime overall, there were deliberate choices made in this show which harm it in the bigger picture. And looking at all of those choices piled together, maybe the point of the show was to get us to talk. Choices were made by either Netflix or Sega, and what is now available for streaming was approved by them. So, is it too far-fetched to assume the show was meant to be controversial? Well, like anything else regarding Sonic the Hedgehog, the answer is never clear, and there are a lot of options. But since I'm up for any excuse to talk about Sonic, let's delve into this crazy theory of mine, shall we? So you say that Sonic Prime was meant to be controversial? I hear you ask through the Shadowverse, and my answer, while not definitive, revolves around the idea that it was probably meant to raise some questions and keep us fans talking. But why, you ask me again, and there are several answers to that. Answers which, if you've followed the show, you might already know without realizing. The biggest one is that Sonic Prime is the first Sonic the Hedgehog show that is canon to the mainline Sonic games. The creators of the show confirmed it, Ian Flynn confirmed it, most people who have a say on the franchise confirmed it, Sonic Prime is canon. So why does it matter? Well, first and foremost, let's actually discuss the canon of the Sonic games, which in all honesty, doesn't really matter much. Yes, the games have stories in them, and there are reasons as to why Game A would take place before Game B, but after Game C. Obviously, every game which has Shadow in it has to happen after Sonic Adventure 2, because that's the game he debuted in. The Rush games have to happen before Generations, because Blaze is familiar with the gang by that point. But in the larger picture, these connections don't matter that much. You don't need to play Sonic Rush in order to understand Sonic Generations. While playing Sonic Adventure 2 can give Shadow the Hedgehog more context, it's not required in order to understand the general plot, or plots considering how that game is structured. The one-time continuity really mattered in this franchise, and even that's not that big of a deal, is with Sonic Frontiers, in which characters reference past events as part of the idea of the story, acknowledge the past and head towards a better future. Besides that though, the Sonic canon isn't something that's set in stone with one definitive answer as to when things happen and in what order. Yes, Sonic Adventure 2 has to happen after the classic series and before Sonic Heroes, But who's to say Sonic Advance can't happen before or after it? Generations may take place right after Colors, but who's to say one of the storybook games didn't happen in between? Hell, how many people watching this played Sonic Adventure 2 before 1 because they ported 2 to the GameCube first? Nothing broke then, right? Where am I going with this long tangent? The Sonic canon isn't something that's extremely well defined. It can be fun to connect the dots and see that characters actually remember past events, which is one of the best parts about Frontiers' story in my opinion. But let's not pretend that each game doesn't stand on its own without many ties to the others. And let's not pretend that there aren't some canonical mistakes or inconsistencies throughout the franchise. Anyone in the audience care to explain to me the 06 and Rush connections because of Blaze? Yeah, that's what I thought. Back to Sonic Prime though, it's been common knowledge by this point that each of the other Sonic shows were in a continuity of their own, unrelated to the games. Even Sonic X, which adapted some of the game plots, is considered to be its own timeline. So why is Prime canon? What's so special about that one? I don't think there's an official answer for that question. We're just told that it's canon and we're supposed to accept it because the people in power said so. I mean, would you question Walt Disney if he said House of Mouse is canonical to PK Out of the Shadows? I mean, most likely, but it's not like anything we say could change his mind because he's the person in charge and has the final say. However, this one claim that Prime is canon hurts the show more than anything else. While the games don't have the most consistent timeline ever, there are several things which are well established and the show seems to contradict, especially when it comes to Sonic's character, and we'll get to that later. The debates on when exactly in the game's timeline the show takes place have raged on for a whole year and a month the show has been on, and we just got confirmation by Ian Flynn that Prime's place in the timeline doesn't matter. Because the show retcons himself. They fucking 06 test, I can't fucking believe. So if Prime's placement in the canon doesn't matter, and there are many continuity problems like Sonic being surprised by having a metal copy, why bother making it a part of the canon to begin with? To have a selling point? Isn't CG animated Netflix show about Sonic in the multiverse enough of a hook? Maybe I'm nitpicking this, but when this is the 6th show in a franchise where all the previous shows were in their own continuity, why make a big deal about this one sharing the main continuity? When, like I said, the inconsistencies in it harm the show for longtime fans and make it worse. Not to mention, they make Sonic's characterization worse. Okay, no point in delaying the inevitable, I guess. Sonic's characterization is probably the most polarizing thing about this show, which says something considering the years of debate coming from the games themselves. The question of who is Sonic the Hedgehog can be met with so many answers and responses which won't necessarily contradict each other, but could definitely show people have different ways in which they see the blue guy. But overall, Sonic is an adventurous and free-spirited teenager who's very cocky and sarcastic, but is at his very core a good dude who'd be the first to lend a hand or raise the spirits of everyone in need. He is brash and overconfident, but he's also caring, encouraging, and would never brush his friends to the side. He's proud but never afraid to admit he made a mistake, or ashamed to rely on his friends. He sees his adventures as a way to have fun and excitement in life, but he knows when to be serious and focus on the task at hand. I literally have no idea how many people are going to agree with the description I just gave, but that's how Sonic has always been presented in the games. Maybe there are some changes between one specific game to another, but the basis always remains. Other canons have tweaked his character a bit, with Archie Sonic seeming to be the most cocky of the bunch, Underground Sonic being the most chili dog obsessed of all the Sonics, and Movie Sonic being the youngest and most emotional. While these are different takes on the character which don't match the game's canon all the way through, they're smart to contain them in their own canon, and not insist on being connected to the games. Sonic Prime is canon, however, and considering everyone seems to state that it is, I'm going to judge Sonic's characterization as if he is the same Sonic from the games, and for the majority of the show, it doesn't make sense. Sonic has two main arcs in the show: not to rush into danger and appreciating his friends and walking alongside them. Debates on if Sonic the Hedgehog as a character should go through development or not aside, let's focus on the latter of the two arcs for the sake of the argument. Based on Ian Flynn's Twitter and general logic based on what we see in the show, Sonic Prime has to happen sometime after Sonic Advance 3, since there's a flashback reference in it, and probably Colors since Orbot and Cubot show up. With the show taking place after Sonic Advance 3, a game where the main gimmick is controlling a team of two characters, wouldn't it mean that Sonic already appreciates his friends and would rely on them by this point? And considering Shadow seems to have an established rivalry with Sonic, this show has to take place after Sonic Heroes, in which we find out he's alive after Adventure 2's ending. Now, let's listen to one of Sonic's most well-known quotes from Heroes.
We'll show that creep the real superpower of teamwork!
Does this sound like a guy who doesn't appreciate his friends and needs to learn the meaning of teamwork? When you look at how Sonic's acting in flashbacks during Season 1 and how surprised his friends are by his enthusiasm for teamwork after everything resets, this is a major contradiction to an established characterization. And you can't tell me that it's an obscure detail or something. This is from a mainline game, the first multi-platform Sonic game. And with that same logic, this show has to take place after Sonic Adventure 2, where Sonic doesn't blow up the Eclipse cannon in order to save Amy. And a second later, he downright tells Tails that he's counting on him to finish the job when he thinks he's doomed. Sonic the Hedgehog cares and appreciates his friends. If anything, one of his problems, which becomes a plot point in this very show, could be that he's too trusting of Nine. So which one is it? Does he not trust or care for his friends enough, or is he too trusting? Make up your mind! Regarding the rushing into danger part of the show, that one is a bit more fitting for Sonic to learn. Even if we've done this before in Sonic Lost World, I'm willing to forgive it, since this is a series and not a game, and I understand the need for the main character to learn something. For the living embodiment of speed, it makes sense for Sonic to act without thinking. That's a part of him that can be explored more than once, since impulse isn't something you can always control in the heat of the moment. So I don't mind it. If anything, I think Prime did this arc way better than Lost World, since we actually see Sonic come to terms with his mistake and he can learn from it. Also, it's not as rushed as it was in Lost World, and it does seem like the development stuck with him following the show's events, unlike Lost World, which just kinda resets to a status quo. On a side note, I've seen people call Sonic dumb in this show, and I have to disagree on that. There's a difference between dumb and impulsive. If anything, he sometimes comes up with solutions and strategies a dumb person won't even think about. Impulsive is a person who acts before thinking, not a person who can't think at all. And there's a difference there. My problem isn't that Sonic is dumb, but that they never really figured out how experienced he is. Sometimes he's as confident and cool as you'd expect him to be, and sometimes it's like he's regressing in his abilities. Almost like they tried hitting a balance between Game Sonic and Movie Sonic, even though this middle ground is basically impossible to reach. And if you're going to argue that Sonic making corny jokes and yelling when he falls from the sky makes him dumb, then you obviously don't know Sonic the Hedgehog and are lying to yourselves, because it always happens. So all in all, the show's biggest problem is that Sonic's characterization is inconsistent, both in terms of the game's canon and the show itself. Considering the show's name is Sonic Prime, that is a serious problem. Obviously, Sonic's the main character, and if you don't jive with the main character, either because he's acting differently than what you're used to, or because he's not supposed to learn any lessons in your mind, that can kill a show. I don't mind Sonic learning lessons, not being brash anyway, but if this is the same Sonic from the games, then I want him to be consistent and not change to learn a lesson he shouldn't learn, trusting his friends. That's exactly what happened, however, and Sonic was forced to learn a lesson he should know by default. You can't tell me these decisions were made by mistake. People knew what they were doing when they wrote this. This was the intention behind the show. But okay, the show's inconsistent and won't appeal to everyone. Why doesn't want to be controversial? Did you notice that besides Sonic and Shadow, the main characters from the games barely get any screen time? They do show up, but the show is focused more on their alternate counterparts rather than their actual selves. Not that there's anything wrong with it, it's the point of the show after all. And I'll just say now that I liked some, if not most, of these alternate characters. Knuckles the Dread was fun, the Amy sisters were great, also Amy sisters sounds totally like a parody of Scarlet Sisters from Hamilton, just wanted to bring it up. Nine is arguably the best thing about the show, I will protect Mangy with my life. These aren't bad takes on the characters and I enjoyed spending time with them. However, these other versions aren't the characters which we came to see, and in the end they serve the purpose of Sonic learning to appreciate the actual characters we did come to see and are barely around. Not only that, but once Sonic and Shadow are back to the regular timeline, we don't see these alternate takes again. What happened to them? What about Nine's character arc? All of their character arcs. Did the other Shadow Spaces return to normal after this whole mess? Did Nine stay in the Grim? Can they travel between spaces? What about these guys? Was their only purpose to literally establish connections Sonic had for years with his real friends? How is that not meant to draw fire from the fanbase and lead to debates of the angry kind? So let's recap. We have a show about Sonic the Hedgehog in which Sonic is sometimes himself and sometimes not. We don't get to see much of his friends and are focused more on alternate versions of them. And by the end of it all, the show wraps up without any significance and we are off to the next adventure while everyone claiming to us that it's canon to the games, but also doesn't matter. Starting to see why I think the show wants to be controversial? There are deliberate choices made here, which I can only assume were made to make people question the show and bring it up in conversation. I get that there's no such thing as bad publicity at the end of the day, and you need to draw people to see your show and keep it in the daily talk. But is this really the way? I have to stress this again. I really enjoyed Sonic Prime. I would even say it's in my top 3 favorite Sonic shows, and I mentioned why earlier. However, I can also criticize stuff which I didn't like about it, and if the show is indeed canon, then I'll point where it fails in terms of continuity and character writing. That doesn't make the worst show ever, or means that everyone behind it is trying to piss us off intentionally. Me thinking the show had the intention to start off controversy is nothing more than a crazy theory, but it's also not necessarily a bad thing. Just a point of discussion about the show. But as I was putting together the script, a realization came to me, which might be a bit of a controversial take in itself. You see, I was going to point out Ian Flynn's placement in the timeline doesn't matter to it as an argument for the show wanting to be controversial, but then something hit me. You know what Sonic Prime actually is? It's a storybook game. Yeah, I know it's not set in a mythology of any kind, but think about it. Sonic is sucked into an alternate universe where his friends are not themselves and don't know him, he sticks around to help while also trying to figure out how to get home, is accompanied by a friend who betrays him at some point, he gets a not supersonic super form connected to the MacGuffins he needs to find instead of the Chaos Emeralds, he ends up saving these worlds and then he comes back home and the adventure is basically non-impactful and could have happened at any time. How many of you are already trying to hunt me down because I compared Prime to the storybook games? Well, put down the pitchforks and let me try and explain why this is relevant. The storybook games, at least in terms of their stories, are well regarded in the fandom. Personally, I'll defend Black Knight's story to the end of time. So it's not like people are strangers to the bare concept of Prime. The main difference between the storybook games and Sonic Prime, though, is that in the storybook games, Sonic doesn't go through an arc himself and is more inspiring others on how to grow and lead a better life. Which brings us back to the idea of if Sonic should learn a lesson or not. Notice how this is the biggest argument in Sonic Prime discussions, a show that basically does something people liked but is getting flack for doing one thing differently? This could be a big coincidence, and I'm aware Ian Flynn was only a consultant on Prime and he didn't actually write it, but you can't tell me this mega fan didn't catch the similarities and pointed them out. And if he didn't, well, I can make mistakes too, you know. Again, I'm not trying to prove anything with this video. I'm just sharing a crazy theory I had, which may insert some new angles to the talk surrounding the show. If anyone who walked on Sonic Prime saw this video, please remember that I enjoyed the show a whole lot, and that my thought process isn't trying to imply anything regarding your intentions. I can tell you had a lot of fun working on this show and that you gave it your best, unlike another animated streaming show based on a beloved franchise, and I wish you guys a bright career in the future. Did Sonic Prime actually want to be controversial? There are a lot of ways where I can say yes, but I can also see how some of them were mistakes, or just coincidences. And if it had any intention to do so in order to start up a talk, then you know what, it doesn't make the show bad in my opinion overall. So what do you think? Let me know in the comment section. So now that Sonic Prime is over, what about that Knuckles series, Paramount?